Ladies and gentlemen, my friend, Lieutenant Rajiv Srinivasan.
I'll save those for later. How's everybody doing? Everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Hey, first off, biggest congrats to the class of 2011. Princeton University, that is a big deal. That is a very big deal. I tell you what, I've interacted with a lot of folks from Princeton, and they have three things in common. They are brilliant, they are passionate, and they are hardworking. And I know that's to be expected of every single one of you. So biggest congrats. I'm very proud of you, and I'm proud to be here. So not too long ago, less than a year actually, I found myself as a platoon leader in the deserts and the dense forests of Zari Kandahar. I was leading a platoon of America's best and brightest and bravest men through a very hard war, through minefields, through severe firefights. And it was a fight that really challenged my faith, or what little faith I did have. Because let's be honest here, ladies and gentlemen, the Hindu-American identity in the United States is weak. The Hindu-American identity in the United States is weak. And I contrast that with the Indian-American identity. Now let me explain what I'm talking about here. Let us go back to the most formative experiences of our childhood. What it's like walking around as a 5 or 6-year-old in your kindergarten class. And I'll tell you what I experienced. As an Indian American, you can say, oh, you know what, I'm India. You're right, I can point to India's phenomenal success in the woo, yeah. Success, excuse me. I mean, we'll talk about other great ways that it's significant as well, but that's later on. We can talk about India's phenomenal success on the global stage. We can point to that as something that is, we can be proud of. We can point to India in terms of our festivals and our bright, beautiful celebrations and say, you know, that is fun, that is accessible. We can point to the heroes, the national heroes that we have, Mohandas Gandhi, Sardar Patel, because the values upon which those men stood are very accessible to the values upon which men like Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, and Thomas Jefferson stood. These are accessible traits of the Indian American identity. Being an Indian American is accessible to our peers and therefore easier for us to live by. But when you go ahead and tell someone that you are a Hindu American, something else happens. How do you describe to your American friend who's never met a Hindu before that you pray to a statue, idol worship, that you go to something called an archana and they pour milk all over that stone, that your priests wear togas and have buns in their hair, and God help you if you tell them that you're a vegetarian? Because the response that I got when I was a kid was, don't you know God put animals on this earth so we could eat them? This is true. And it's not because those kids are ignorant. This isn't a question of ignorance or smarts or anything like that. It's just the way we are as children, you know? Now, if you had to undergo that as a little kid, how much of a Hindu would you call yourself? And that's the way we are. And it's really hard for a lot of American second, third generation Indians to really embrace that Hindu identity. And that's what happened to me. When I grew up through high school, I nominally embraced the Indian part. I loved going to those Indian association functions and dancing some bhangra and having fun. But when it came to the Hindu, the spirituality of Hinduism, I went through the motions. I did my dhanupattu, I ate my prasad. That was about it. I had a void of an identity. And then the end of my high school tour came around and it was time to pick a college. And you know, West Point came on the radar for the wrong reasons. I applied to West Point for the wrong reasons. I am very clear about that. I applied because I wanted to be a big leader in business. And I saw a lot of West Pointers waving around those flashy rings, hanging around those investment banks and making a lot of money. And I said, you know what, that is an identity. When I had a void of an identity, that is one that I can grab a hold of. That is one that I wanted. Those are very wrong and selfish reasons to go to West Point. But it's not what, just like I tell these cadets and candidates that apply today, it is not why you come, it's why you stay. And very quickly when I was at West Point, I found out that my identity as a Hindu had the opportunity to flourish. And in a very atypical environment, the United States Army. Who would have thought that an army, an institution based on conformity, on uniforms, on standards, where we are all equal, we are all little infantrymen fighting towards the same common purpose, could help me embrace the unique spirituality that I had? And you know who did it? It was a classmate of mine. His name is Christopher Gakey. Chris Gakey was an amazing, amazing soldier in person. I remember very, very fondly the first time we really interacted with each other. We were just at the dining table in a mess hall and just talking about our experiences. Now, Chris, you have to understand, was a man who had a rather hard life. A man who channeled all of that frustration into his mind. He was a brilliant, brilliant academic, very strong intellectual, into his body. He had a physique like a monster. And his soul. He was a devout follower of Christ. I used to joke with him. I used to say, hey, you know what, Chris? You and I, we both have bodies like gods. Except yours is more Hercules and mine's more Buddha. We got along great. And I remember the first time that we really interacted that day at the mess hall. He told me, so Rajiv, you're a Hindu? And I said, yep. And he's like, what's that like? What is your day-to-day relationship with God like? I want to know what it's like to see the world through the eyes of a Hindu. And quite frankly, that was the first time that someone had really questioned my faith in a genuine way without the intent of changing it. And I think you know what I mean. That meant a lot to me. So now I had this guy saying, hey, Rajiv, I want to know about your faith. And I was like, well, I guess I better go get some faith. So I decided to start reading the Bhagavad Gita. And I did it very casually, but as Vineet said, that story takes place on a battlefield. And it resonated with me far more at the academy than it would had I really delved into it as a student in high school or junior high. Arjuna, for those who are not familiar, Arjuna is standing on the precipice of battle. And on the other side is a tyrannical movement that are his blood relatives, his family. And right before that first arrow is shot, he says, you know what, I can't do this. I cannot go to war against my blood relatives. I cannot go against my own family. That goes against every principle I have been taught. I can't do this. And of all people, his chariot driver, Krishna, stands up and says, oh, you're doing it. Because it's right. You stand up for what is right. That is what being a Hindu is about. See, leadership is something very difficult to talk about in grays, in shades of grays. For the leader, one must think in black and white at times. Because when one makes a decision with the lives of, in his case, thousands of people on the line, you have to believe wholeheartedly in what you're doing. You have to believe that you are fighting for what is right and for the good of many, many people. That's powerful. That was tough. How do you go to war against your own family because you think what you're doing is the right thing to do? It's a gutsy statement. So think, what would it take you to get to that point? And this is really what inspired me about the Bhagavad Gita, is that the dialogue is all about understanding the self. And at its core, leadership is not a relationship with the outside world, ladies and gentlemen. Leadership is a relationship with yourself. Leadership is understanding the holes in your own soul, knowing where you're weak, and reinforcing them. And shortly after